to order. Is there any declaration of pecuniary interest? You can clear it anytime you see fit. We have a great agenda here today. We're down to our first one is our delegation. Andrew, I'm going to turn the floor over to you right to start. You look bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, so the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's keeping well and has managed to take enjoy a few of the days of the nice weather during the summer. Am I able to share my screen this morning? I have a presentation that I'd like to run through.
Yes, of course.
Okay, fantastic. Is everyone able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Excellent. So I'm going to provide a brief update just in terms of the key activities that we have been focusing on at the moment and what's upcoming in the pipeline. So you'll be familiar with this first slide, which was presented during our last update with this group, which shows our kickoff meeting that was completed at the end of May 31st this year. And we then had a planning workshop on June 9th. So this was a key starting point for us, allowing us to review the constraints, the background documentation, and meet with different stakeholders to start putting together some of the project planning documents. And most importantly, the request for proposal document for the prime consultant. So right now where we're at is we are waiting, if I can say, for the formal approval and endorsement in order to issue the RFP for the prime consultant. We had budgeted or allowed for approximately 3 months in total from when the kickoff meeting had started until when the prime consultant is retained, and we are in a position to start the kickoff meeting with the prime consultant. We are seeing a little bit of delays in this process, and it hasn't. I don't see it having an impact on cost. It's more on schedule and critical path, because obviously every day that our schedule gets pushed out to hire the prime consultant, it affects the downstream activities such as the design, development, tendering, and construction. But we also fully agree, understand, and appreciate that getting the parameters right in the RFP that will form part of the contract with the design team is essential before entering into a long-term partnership with the design team. So we're working closely to define and update these parameters prior to going out with the RFP. In terms of the strategy and the structure for the request for proposals, we did have an update call with the Ministry of Long-Term Care last week, and the strategy or approach that we put forward is to go out with a single request for proposals in order to obtain the most competitive proposal and to leverage synergies from the design teams, which will consist of architects and engineers that can be leveraged across both projects for Grey Gables and Rockwood Terrace. That being said, we would be looking to execute 2 separate contracts after the RFP for each project, and that will allow the cost to be tracked separately, but also if there happens to be recognizing there would be unique construction budgets for each of the projects, unique terms for each of the projects. We also want to be able to track that carefully and separately, which is why the strategy and approach is a single RFP followed by 2 contracts. The contracts that we have proposed for this project have been standard forms of contracts. So the OAA, or Ontario Association of Architects, standard form of contract with sample supplementary conditions that we have had the chance to circulate to the team at the county for review in terms of more specifically looking at some input from procurement, from insurance, and from legal. So we had a good productive call on July 31st and have updated the documents accordingly. Moving forward, when we are in a position to issue the RFP, we are allowing for 11 weeks in total. So it would be issued on bonfire, open for a period of 5 weeks, followed by a 2-week period to receive and review submissions. The review would be based on predetermined evaluation criteria and weightings that would be part of the RFP. So each of the respondents would have access to this prior to their submission. And this review would be done by members of the Colliers team as well as from the county. So it would be an integrated review process. That would be followed by an interview and recommendation period where we've allowed 1 week. And that will be followed by a recommendation that would be issued to the County of Grey for approval before executing a contract and starting a kickoff meeting with the prime consultant. So all in all, there is an 11-week process that we're forecasting that is remaining from the time the RFP would be issued. So if we look at, for example, a scenario where the RFP would be issued by mid-August, that would put us on track for a kickoff meeting early November. Likewise, mid-September would be early December. And that remains the key focus at the moment. Are there any questions with regards to the RFP, the timeline, and some of the work that's been completed to date?
Thank you, Andrew. I cannot see the full screen, so
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me.
there, I can see it right. Does the committee have any questions? Brian, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Andrew, I'm wondering, is there any extra time built into this for delays or whatever?
At this point, I'd say our schedule is quite aggressive to meet the March 31st, 2025 timeline. So we haven't allowed much fluff, if I can say, from a schedule perspective. Of course, we understand that we're not looking to rush things at all costs, and we understand that there are certain parameters that will require time. And what I can say is, in those scenarios, when we do put our pencil down, it's not time that would be charged or extra cost. You know, we try to be as flexible as we can with that, but the challenge is then trying to recover time downstream. We'd certainly look with the design team and in the downstream process to recover as much as possible, but also want to make sure that there is enough time in the design to make sure we get it right and get all and capture all the requirements that the county will need. So at this point, I would expect from the March 31st date there to be likely at least a month or 2 months that would get added. And we'll be able to fine tune that once we're in a position to award the contract with the prime consultant and we have their work plan and time frame.
Thank you for that answer. And I understand completely your rationale there, but if this project come in on time, I would be absolutely, I don't know what the word would be, but yeah, anyway, this will be a recurring theme. Well, there's been a delay, and I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying this is pretty aggressive, but let's see. Thank you.
Kim, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, can I remind our esteemed Councillor Milne that we brought the administration building project in on time and on budget?
Thank you, Kim. I just felt he was not quite awake yet and he was still dreaming, so that's why I never made any comment.
Okay. Duly noted. And I look forward to the challenge of bringing this puppy in on budget and on time.
There's no question in my mind with Andrew's expertise, it will come in on budget and on time.
I'm not questioning anybody's ability.
Mr. Mackey, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Andrew, for the overview of those timelines. I hope they are reasonable. You talked about a single request for proposals. So, one company looking after the two builds. Can you just briefly outline what the benefits of that are for us, please?
Yeah, absolutely. It follows some of the similar benefits of going out with one contract for the project manager to extract as many synergies as possible between both sites. So specifically during the earlier phases when we're looking at not trying to, if I can use the expression, reinvent the wheel on both sites, where we can leverage some of the meetings with the end users, some of the directions, some of the strategies to make sure that both homes are not completely divergent in how they're developed. So we know there are going to be some site conditions unique to each site that will require a specific design. But during the earlier phases, during the functional programming, I think there is a lot of synergies that can be used for both projects that would benefit from having one prime consultant team versus two separate teams that would be starting from scratch, so to speak. If under a scenario where both projects would be advancing at a slightly offset pace, if I can say that, then that will also allow resource loading and flexibility to balance those resources over a period of time. So we would see some great synergies and cost savings as a result of going out with one single RFP. As part of the submission, we would clearly ask for the two separate prices per project, allowing the county to enter into a separate contract for each. We've also outlined as part of the scope of services unique scope or scope that may apply for one project or one site that may not apply to the other one, based on what we've reviewed and what's been done to date. And so all in all, we think this is going to lead to cost savings as a result of leveraging those work that's been done to one side that can apply to the other.
Thank you.
Thanks
Andrew.
very much.
Go ahead, Christine.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Chair, and good morning to everyone. Really enjoying the presentation. Certainly have the confidence, Andrew, with you and your team, certainly. Just to go a little further, based on what Councillor Mackey was talking about, now with the separate contracts, you started to speak on that. Could you just develop that a little more? Where do you see the separation for timelines, or what's the distinction with the two contracts? Thank you.
So that's a great question. I think the very first one is the construction budget. So we know that at the Rockwood Terrace site, just if we look strictly at services going to the site, some of the overall site development would lead to a different construction budget. That is one key parameter that the design team is part of their contract in terms of putting forward a design that fits within that construction budget and an allowable deviation. And so that in this environment, to me, is probably the most critical one to have in there, and that is unique to each of the projects. So that's one example. There's also the project term. We look at the date, the ready for takeover date or substantial performance date, as well as the scope of services. So we don't want to be in a position where if there's a change that's specific to one project that's required, that it's mixed up in one contract and not split out between both.
Thank you, Andrew. Andrew, a question from the chair. The construction world out there now is just a completely different animal altogether. And what's your feeling, maybe it's premature, but what's your feeling on getting a good intake of consultants that would like to take on this project? Any sense to that yet?
Well, based on RFPs that we've seen in the quarter, I think it's definitely a risk moving forward. We are still seeing interest right now, so it's a little bit premature to comment. But shortly after the RFP has been issued, we'll be able to gauge that fairly shortly. But it hasn't happened to me yet where we've had opportunities with little or no respondents. So I am very hopeful that there would be at least 4 submissions, and from everything I've seen, generally that has been the case. But you're absolutely right with the number of beds being approved, projects and clients that are looking forward to moving forward. That is a risk.
Thank you, Andrew. Does the committee have any other questions? Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, just thank you, Mr. Chair, and that's encouraging to hear that you still feel that there's substantial contractors out there. I know right now in the Markdale site, there is a contractor that's in the process of building a new hospital, and timeframes. 2 things, I guess. There could be a possibility, I guess, when they were getting to the earlier or later stages of that hospital, they may be interested just because they're on site and in the area I'm not supposing that. I'm just saying that could be a great opportunity for that particular company. But do you have to predetermine or pre-qualify your contractors, or do you already have a sort of has that already been sort of already done?
So that's a good question. It's too early yet to start that pre-qualification process. It is not a requirement from the Ministry of Long-Term Care. However, we would strongly encourage the county to pre-qualify a pool of capable general contractors, a single pool that could then be invited for 2 separate tenders for each of the projects. But we need to be in a position where we know more specifics about the project. So we would start this, a quarter or a couple quarters ahead of when we're forecasting going out to tender. So there's still a little bit too many unknowns at this stage, but we would fully anticipate going out for pre-qual.
But just to add to that, if I may, Mr. Chair, so, but I guess those pre-qualifying contractors that could be out there are aware of what's happening in the industry. Like they're sort of, like you're saying that there is interest. So I guess that's a good thing that they know what's sort of coming down the line, because as contractors, they have employees and they want to make sure they keep everybody moving and keep things, and it's all about coordination and that type of thing. So obviously the word's out there, I guess, as well. Is that fair to say or fair to assume?
Well, if I can add over there, I think this would likely require be part of the overall communication strategy. So when updates are issued with regards to the project and how the design is developing, that should give an overall sense and prompt some of the available contractors in terms of high level timelines and what to plan for internally. And then as we get closer, we are in a position to issue the pre-qual, that will give more of the details in terms of project specifics for them to really start looking into more detail about whether they have the interest, capacity, and availability for executing the projects.
And just last comment, I know both Markdale and Durham have Tim Hortons, so I know that's a big draw.
Thank you, Andrew. I think the biggest challenge as we move forward is going to be the ability for the general contractor to take on more projects and be able to have the manpower to proceed ahead. That's my biggest concern, and it's something that we'll have no control on and just have to play it day by day as we go on. Christine, I believe I've seen your hand up.
Oh, thank you for being so accurate and sharing. Thank you very much. My question was answered already. It was dealing with pre-qualification, and the discussion had just taken place. So thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Christine. This just shows you how efficient we are, even when coming down to scheduling. It's the same thing. Is there any other questions? Go ahead, Kim.
Not a question. I just wanted to say thank you to Andrew. We kind of put this meeting in on a little bit of short notice, and I know that he has another commitment this morning. So I'm really grateful to him for making time for us and for being first up this morning without the other report coming ahead. So thanks so much, Andrew.
Thanks very much, everyone. And if there are any follow-up questions after, please feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to address them.
Thank you, Andrew. Nice to have that update. Thanks very much.
Okay, bye now.
Take care. Bye.
So we'll move on for our next report. CAOR RD09 redevelopment project update. And Kim, are you going to take this on?
I will start this report. And before I do,
sorry, we do need a mover and seconder, Mr. Chair, for the resolution first.
Okay, it was already moved by Brian Millen and second by Brian O'Leary.
Excellent. Before I get into the report, I did want to take a minute. You'll notice that we have someone new around our table today. And so you'll know that we had an earlier discussion about bringing some new financial analysts onto the team. And I wanted to introduce Marcus Hawko, sorry, apologies, Marcus, who is going to be working with Joanna and focused on the long-term care portfolio. We're so pleased to have Marcus on the team. He comes to us with some really wonderful experience, both from the private sector accounting world at KPMG and another firm, as well as from the hospital sector. So he's got a great wealth of experience that we'll make sure we get the most benefit from. So I don't know, Marcus, if you wanted to just say hi to everyone.
Yeah, hello everyone. Looking forward to working with you all and with the long-term care portfolio, and we're very excited to move up to the area too now. So this is my fiance's hometown of Owen Sound, at least. So we're glad to move back up to the good country, as her grandpa always calls it.
Welcome.
And, yeah,
Well-
Marcus comes with a bonus because his wife, if you don't mind me saying, his wife is a nurse. So we
Yes.
needed those two. So it's worked out very well for everyone.
Welcome aboard, Marcus, to the great county team. Go ahead, Tim.
Okay, thanks so much, everyone. Okay, so moving along here, the report, part of this, Andrew had covered off a little bit, but I just wanted to make sure that our records were complete, and you were all apprised of exactly what has taken place since the last time we met. So we did enter into a formal agreement with Colliers, and as he noted, while there's a single agreement, there will be separate tracking and reporting for each of the projects. And the targeted completion date for Colliers and for all of this work is March 31st, 2025. Within the agreement with Colliers, there's a detailed schedule of both project milestones and deliverables. So we have, I think, a really good foundation from which to start. And I did want to show you, these complex projects over a number of years, can at times be challenging to keep track of all the parts if you don't lay them out properly to begin with. And so I just wanted to show the committee the way that, for example, this is the way the invoices are going to be laid out. And I was grateful to Colliers for working with us to set something up that will help both of us. This is a different format than they've been asked to use in the past. And you can see how the invoices it breaks down the entire engagement into a series of phases. It shows how the bid price for the entire engagement was broken down against each one of those key project activities. And then as they invoice us, they'll show us what proportion of that particular activity has been completed, what they've billed, what they're billing now. And so I think this will really be helpful to everyone as time passes. And a number of these things we'll be working on them in parallel. It's not like you do all of one thing and it's finished and then you move on to the next. You've got multiple things happening at once. And so there'll be an invoice like this for each project. Also, as Andrew indicated, we did have a meeting on July the 28th with the province just to talk about the development agreements. This was an opportunity to connect Andrew and the Colliers team with Julie Gerard and our project management team at the Ministry of Long-Term Care. So they've worked beside each other on other things, but they've never worked directly together. So that was a chance for them to get to know each other. We had a really good discussion about what the next steps were as far as the county was concerned. We have all of the draft documents for the development agreements, as does Colliers. When we get through the RFP for the architect, there'll be a lot of detailed information in the RFP response that will then be transferred into the development agreement. So once we've got that piece of work done, then we'll be in good shape and moving along. The provincial folks did confirm that the licensing work has been completed. You don't actually officially get your license until the end of the whole process, but as long as we complete the projects, there's not an issue there with securing the licenses. So then that brings us to the third part of this report, which is about the financial update. Now, Kevin Wepler did provide an update ages ago about this new funding model that the province had announced last November. But I thought it was so long ago that we probably all needed to be reminded of exactly what it was, what it said. So there's a bit of a different funding model than we had assumed back in the day. The other thing that's changed is on the cost side of this. And with the benefit of Colliers having projects in play right now, as well as having completed some recently, they suggested that the numbers that we had been assuming were no longer correct and needed to be adjusted. So we've run new pro formas here at $400,000 a bed as well. Because the Durham site is a greenfield site, servicing will need to be pulled into that site, and as well as all the normal site prep that has to go on. We asked GM Blue Plan for a very high level estimate of what that would cost. And so they've provided or suggested that we should carry $5.5 million to service the site. So that'll get you your site prep, your stormwater, but pulling water, wastewater, hydro, natural gas, all of those pieces will need to be brought to the building site in order for us to complete the project. So that's there. But you see what this does to our bottom line is brings the total cost of construction for both projects to $108 million. And also, so we have funding, the provincial portion of the funding, which, you know, I think originally we talked about that split between what the province puts in and what the county is responsible for. I think at one time we were around maybe 60-40. I think that is for the province. I think we're much closer to either a 50-50 or a little bit more on the county side than on the provincial side. So after we consider that we have funding for 190 beds out of the 256 that you intend to build, right? Because the existing beds at Grey Gables are not funded at all. It brings the two project bottom lines here. And I'm going to turn it over to Mary Lou now to kind of walk us through these estimates. So Mary Lou, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Just share my screen. I don't think I've got the right screen shared.
No, you're good, I think.
Can you see the committee report? Okay.
Yep, we're good.
It's just not highlighted red around my screen like I would be on Teams.
Yeah.
Okay. So there are two scenarios. There's one ran at 3% interest and one at 4%. So I'll do the one at 3%, and that just, then it explains the calculation. I'll use a caveat that the Infrastructure Ontario lending rate for a 25-year debenture yesterday was 2.58%. So I think 3% likely will be on the low side, and that's why we have a scenario for 4. So we've broken them down into two separate builds, and that's another reason for Colliers. In order for the construction, for the development subsidy and the construction costs, there's eligible and ineligible expenditures. So we're going to need to be able to track that. And so it's going to cause Joanna and Marcus to have to add some GL accounts and make sure that we can do the reporting. So at $400,000 a bed, for Grey Gables, 128 beds is $51.2 million. And if I look at Rockwood Terrace, the only difference is we've added in $5.5 million as an estimate for site improvement costs. So as Kim mentioned, we're just under $108 million to build 256 beds. The next difference is for Grey Gables, only the 62 beds that are additional are eligible for construction funding. and redevelopment. The 66 beds, of course, because they are not in the eligible window for redevelopment. So we'll get a funding for 190 beds. There are different per diems based on the market area. We fall within the rural, so $20.78 per bed. And there's a medium home component based on how many beds you're building of 75 cents. So that gets us a construction subsidy of $21.53 per resident per day. And there's 69,350 days between the two homes. We get the construction subsidy over 25 years. We don't get it up front. So we have to borrow our full amount of money. We'll have a debenture cost, and then this construction subsidy of $487,000 for Grey Gables and $1,005,000 for Rockwood Terrace. That'll come off what is required to be raised by the levy. So just as a total, the construction subsidy over 25 years is $37.3 million, or just under $1.5 million per year. There is a development grant of $29,246 per eligible bed. So that total development grant is just under $5.6 million. And I'll just scroll down and I'll show you. There's a number of provisions. So the development grant is 12% of the estimated construction cost. So in our scenario, the construction costs exceed 12%, but they have to be eligible costs. So at least $242,100 per bed out of our $400,000 needs to be eligible expenditures in order to qualify for the development grant. And the ineligible expenditures are things like development charges, architect fees, building permits, furniture and equipment not affixed to the building. So our beds, resident seating areas would not be eligible. Things like if you had ceiling lifts, they would be eligible. A floor lift would not be. So that's another part of like keeping track of what our costs are. So we've got a construction cost of almost $108 million. At the end of 2021, we're going to have just under $8.6 million in reserves for this project. We've been putting away the money that was initially held for the Lee Manor debenture, which is the $1,361,000, because we knew at some point we were doing redevelopment and we weren't going to have to raise that money from taxation. So I'm estimating a 2022, 2023, and 2024 contribution to the reserve. And 2025, assume we will make debenture payments or we will use that money to offset costs in the year. So that decreases the amount that we need to borrow to just over $95 million. Then if I take the development grant off of the $5,556,740, our principal loan amount, or the amount we're going to borrow, is just under $90 million. At a 3% interest rate with a 25-year term, that results in a requirement of $5,150,000 a year. We have construction funding subsidy of just under $1.5 million. The amount, the levy, will be $3,657,000. As I mentioned above, we already have the $1,361,000 built into the levy. This would require an increase to the levy of just under $2.3 million. If I run through the same costs using a 4% interest rate, our annual repayment using 4% is $5,740,000. We have our construction subsidy coming off that. The annual levy requirement, $4,247,000. What's already built in the levy of the $1.36 million. And that would require a levy increase of just under $2.9 million. And what we're recommending as staff is that we start building into the 2022 budget a transfer to reserve to bridge towards making that levy, the levy that is required for the debenture payment, so that we're not looking for all of this money in the year that we're going to make a debenture payment.
If you want to stop sharing your screen, then Mary Lou.
Perfect. Yes.
And I'll just add to, for the committee's understanding about how this all fits. Mary Lou and I are bringing a report to County Council on next Thursday, on August the 12th, that really walks council through the bigger financial picture, kind of a long-term financial outlook for the county that includes the numbers that you've seen here this morning, just to kind of put some context around it so that everybody is aware. But I didn't want to surprise the members of this committee with new numbers that you hadn't seen yet, which is why we thought we better have a meeting and walk you through this right now, so that you're aware and we can answer any questions that you have. But then unless there's changes coming out of our discussions this morning, you'll see these numbers again in the larger financial report next week.
Wow. Comments or questions from the committee? Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mary Lou, what percentage tax levy increase is 2.3 million? Approximately.
Almost 4.
Over 4% right now.
Okay, thank you.
Wow. Go ahead, Scott.
It's not much if you say it quick.
No, say it quick. Mary Lou, thank you for those projections. Can you tell us, as far as a debenture, is that when you take a debenture, you mentioned that the rate right now, I think, is 2.58. At what point are you able to lock in a rate going forward?
I guess when you know how much you want to borrow. For Lee Manor, we did it in 2 stages. So we went out and our first debenture was $6 million. And that was basically when we decided that we had spent enough out of using the county funds. And then when the project was essentially wrapped up and we knew what our total costs were going to be, then we went out for the second debenture, which was $4,890,000.
So is there a possible option, once, council has, looked at this, and is there an option of taking a debenture on a certain amount, recognizing that we may not know the end amount, but being able to lock in, at today's rate? I mean, when you look at the difference between 3% and 4%, that's close to a 1% levy increase right there. That difference from, the 20-year 2,296 up to 2,886, right? That's, a significant difference. And if we were able to lock in at a lower rate of 2.8, would there be a financial benefit to the county?
I'd have to have a conversation with Infrastructure Ontario to discuss the options that they've identified was using construction subsidy, or a construction loan, which gives you financing until you're ready to execute the debenture. I'm not sure about borrowing in advance. It's something we can look into.
Would they not expect you, they'd expect you to start making payments?
They will expect you to start making payments. And the one instance I can think of years ago was there was a home that was going to be built, I believe, at Thunder Bay. There was some controversy that the funds were borrowed. So at that point, you could borrow in advance. Council, there was a new council came in. They decided not to proceed. They used the funds for something else, I believe. Then there was the next council came in, decided to build, and then they had to borrow money because they'd spent the money that had already been borrowed.
Wow.
If I recall the whole thing correctly, so that I've never heard of anything quite like that, but we can reach out to our representative at Infrastructure Ontario and ask the question. But yes, they will expect a debenture payment.
Which would have a levy impact in 2022.
Yes, for sure.
Thank you. I see hands going up all over the place. I guess I'll go to Christine first.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the detailed financial outlook. Just wondering if you could just guide me through, would we be looking at separate debentures as we'd be looking at separate construction contracts? And if that's the case, what would the impact on the levy be? Is it a straight, if it's 4%, is it 2% for the Rockwood Terrace project, 2% for Grey Gables? Or what's the differential there? And I wonder if you could just speak in those terms. Sorry. Speak in those terms. I lost my screen
Sure.
for a moment. Apologies.
I'll go
Thank
back and share my screen again. So on our analysis, we did do the costs separately. So you can see Grey Gables, it has an annual repayment of 2.8 million, less the construction subsidy, which brings it down to about 2.348. We split up the levy requirement and said 52, just under 53,000 of it would be apportioned to Grey Gables, as we had been putting the 1,361,000 away for the development of Rockwood Terrace when we finished with Lee Manor. So Lee Manor's cost, or sorry, Rockwood Terrace's cost is 2.3 million. The construction subsidy is just over $1 million. The levy requirement of 1.3 million. And so we wouldn't need a requirement for Rockwood Terrace at 3%. The 1,361,000 would cover that build. It would be to cover Grey Gables. And
On
Grey
the
Gables
3%.
at 3%, Grey Gables would result in needing about $2.3 million for the redevelopment. If I do that at 4%,
Yes.
there isn't sufficient money for Rockwood Terrace out of the 1.361 million. It would require $212,344 increase to the levy. And Grey Gables would require almost 2.7 million for a total of just under 2.9.
Okay.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
And I'm following along on the chart as well, but the additional descriptive walkthrough was most helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. I wondered, I'm going to ask a question before I go to other members. How does this impact the overall county as a whole to be able to move forward with anything else other than long-term care?
Well, that is part of the discussion for next week. But Mary Lou, if you want to speak in kind of general terms about the repayment limit in our debt management policy.
Sure. So the report Kevin brought forward talked about the annual repayment limit set out by the ministry is 25% of our net revenues. 25% is considered the maximum threshold. And if you were going out and looking for to issue your own debentures, so that people could buy your debentures, the market looks and says a good indicator would be that your debt is no higher than 10% of net revenues. So that's what our debt management policy is based on. That 15% differential would give you the room to deal with unanticipated issues. The flexibility, should there be some wonderful grant opportunity come out that we needed to raise our own share, and we had to borrow because we couldn't afford to do it out of our own reserves or to raise from taxation. So the 10% is considered a best practice among municipalities. So the piece I'm working on right now is to demonstrate what that looks like. And I will say at the 10% limit, if we did the borrowing at 4%, that would leave us about $1.5 million in annual debt that we could afford to do at the 10% of net revenues, assuming there isn't a dramatic increase in our 10% net revenues. And it's own source revenues. So things like government grants, gas tax, anything we bring out of deferred revenue aren't included. And net revenue, in my mind, is somewhat misleading because it's not just money that we have that doesn't have strings attached to it. So for example, the rent that we get from our housing tenants is considered in our own source revenue. But we all know that that revenue is used for other purposes. It offsets the bottom line of the cost of maintaining almost 1,000 units of housing. Own source revenue also includes things like the funds that our long-term care residents contribute toward their accommodation. And I guess I'll go as far as to say that, you know, if my bank told me that I could afford to borrow $900,000 for a house, that would be the upper threshold. It doesn't mean I necessarily should do so. And that's why the province says, okay, 25% really is your upper threshold. That's what you can do. But it's up to you to decide your level of, I'd say, being comfortable with debt. And it all depends on your term and how long you're prepared to tie up that portion of your repayment limit. So because of the significant cost of this, we've went out and looked at this at 25 years. And that aligns nicely with the construction subsidy that we're going to get from the province of 25 years.
Thank you, Mary Lou. I'm going to go to Councillor Millen first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mary Lou, for that, because that was sort of the essence of my question, was where we're at with our payment capacity. But I'm just wondering, and I guess you're working on it, I think if I understood your answer correctly, where we are at. Although, did I understand correctly that at the 3% interest level, to stay under the 10% of net revenues, we could borrow no more than an additional $1 million? Is that what I understood roughly? Or not?
So I was using 4%.
Oh, so 4%.
4%. Okay. And this was what your annual debt can be.
Right. Right.
So I'll see if.
But that ties up, if I could just, Mr. Chair, just continue. So that ties up our entire borrowing capacity to stay within that 10% for the next 25 years. Or, you know, thereabouts.
Yes.
So if Councillor O'Leary needs a new laptop, sorry, he's back to a pen and pencil. Is that what I understand? Pen and paper. Okay.
The room at a 10% limit is just under $1.8 million.
Right.
And then I could do some sample calculations and say, okay, if you wanted to borrow more money at 15 years at 4%, you know, what is my 1.8? And I was working on that last night. I can't find my chicken.
That's okay. That gives me a sense of where we're at and some context. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Mary Lou. I'm just wondering, before I go to Paul, Mary Lou, can you make it clear to me, please, that what your report is saying is an impact on the levy about 4% approximately? And is that for 4% for every year for 25 years, or where's that, how's that spread out?
So what we would do is we would start doing a transfer to reserve to build to that request. So you'd start seeing basically a 1% a year. And then once it's built into the levy, then it's there.
If I can add to Mary Lou's response, Mr. Chair. Right now, we'd added 1% to the levy this year as a contribution towards our ability to put money aside for affordable housing. So this would be an additional 1%, as Mary Lou saying, every year until you got to that, you'd establish that new levy threshold, and then you'd build from there. But in addition to the 1% for this, you're still going to have to account for inflation and negotiated collective agreements and that sort of thing, right? Like unless we go back and look at our operations and find savings or make cuts somewhere else, you're also going to see, what's usually, between 1% and 2% a year. That is just standard as far as inflation goes, and you hope that that's offset by growth. And the last couple of years, we've been in good shape that way. But I don't think that any of us, have a 100% assurance that the growth that we've had the last couple of years is the growth that we will continue to see.
Thank you.
Add to what Kim just said, the 1% for the affordable housing this year was funded from the one-time funding reserve. So that is going to be an increase.
New thing. Thanks, Mary Lou. Sorry about that.
2022.
Yeah.
And the other unspokens are really what our provincial partners expect from us as far as us in delivering services. So whether, I'll use the example with long-term care, I'm sure there's going to be different increases to standards, and whatever funding we receive probably won't be sufficient. Paramedic services, we're supposed to receive 50-50 funding. We don't receive that much. So that's another burden on the taxpayer.
Thank you, Mary Lou. Paul, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a few questions here. So we're assuming from the Grey Gables side that we're building a brand new 128 bed facility. Is that correct? Versus an addition to the current Grey Gables.
That is correct. Yes, that it's a brand new building.
Okay. Yeah, so we haven't got that clarity yet, whether that's so I just want to put things in perspective. It's a brand new building versus building the additional wing for 62 new beds. So I think that has to be clear. It's a new building versus an addition of that 62 new beds. Second question is we do have an asset, which is called Grey Gables, what we determined to do with that. And I think some of the modeling that we had shown at our last meeting, showing that there's revenue that offsets some of those costs. So I think we just have to park that at a certain point. It's a little bit premature to know what we're doing as far as an addition or a brand new building, or what the revenue stream is going to come from the current Grey Gables, whether it's repurposed to a long-term care or to assisted living. So I think we have to, I know we're making assumptions on 3% and 4%. I wonder if we should have a 2%, because I look at our municipality over the last 10 years of debentured money. I know the last debenture loan that we just have taken out was just over 1% for 10-year money. To suggest that we're going to have a turnaround in interest rates in the next 3 years, I think our whole economy will be dead, because all the people that have been buying houses at the low, if they were to raise it 2 or 3%, basically, I think we would be looking at high levels of tax arrears. And I can't see the economy, or I can't see our government doing that. Saying that is, I know that I look back at 10-year money that we have borrowed like 8 years ago. And at that time, maybe I remember seeing like 2.75% for infrastructure. I'm talking infrastructure Ontario. I'm sure that's where we're looking at, where we assuming those funds. So there's a lot of, I guess my point here, Mr. Chair, is there's a lot of assumptions, and I think we have to make sure that we're watching all the streams, because 3%, I think, is probably a good number to set at. 4%, I think we got a lot of other problems if that gets to the point that the cost of borrowing is at 4% when we see all the other sectors. Just listen to the business report this morning. There's no indication anytime in the near future that interest rates are going to rise. And I know that we have to go through a construction point before we get into debenturing. That could be a couple of years out. So yeah, there's a lot of things that do change moving forward. But I guess the other part is where's the piece on if it's either a partial build or a brand new Grey Gables? What about the streamlines that are going to be from the current or the current Grey Gables in the sense of assisted living? We're not addressing that, because that's another piece of the puzzle. But certainly, as we looked at the Simcoe County model, and we've talked a bit about that as well, that's the model that works very well for Simcoe County, is their assisted living model help offset the cost of long-term care. I guess the other option is you sell off that whole. But I mean, our consultants are got to come back and say it makes sense to build a brand new building versus a wing off Grey Gables. Because if you just did the wing, that's a whole different game change in the sense of the demand, because you're getting subsidy for those 62 beds that you're building brand new, but you're not going out and building the other 66 beds that are currently already there. So
Paul,
I don't know how we sit through all that. I guess we got to wait till we see the numbers that come back from the consultants, and when that report comes back to say this is our recommendation based on above.
Let's let Kim comment on that before we go ahead anymore. Kim?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just so two things. The reason that the interest rate information is there, as it's been provided to you this morning, is based on information that came out from Benjamin Tal, who's the chief economist with the Bank of Canada. And this was from the end of June. With economic activity increasing again, several analysts believe the Bank of Canada will start raising interest rates in the second half of 2022. Benjamin Tal says the number one issue facing the Canadian economy is the increased sensitivity to higher interest rates. So that was the reason why we felt it was appropriate to bring that information forward to the committee, because there is that strong potential for interest rates to change. With regard to Grey Gables, and we came to the conclusion that a brand new build in Markdale rather than an addition was preferable, primarily because of the efficiency of operating the home. One of our biggest challenges, and I don't want to speak on Jennifer's behalf, but one of our biggest challenges is recruiting and retaining staff. Anywhere that we can have more efficient operations assists us in being able to meet that challenge. And so that's why we started from the new build piece. I'm not sure. That would be a different proposal. The proposal that the province supported was for a new 128 bed build. I don't know if we would have to go back and renegotiate something with the province again if we decided to do something different, because an addition is not what the province approved. So without talking to them, I couldn't say whether or not how material that was to their deliberations.
Thank you, Kim, for that. Paul, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, and thank you very much for that information. So then the question is what about the modeling then of if that's where we're going and that's where the province is going, and I'm glad that that's been finalized in that sense of what's happening. What's the plan then for Grey Gables? What's the plan for the cost analogy of that building and where we're moving? Because I think that's a very important piece to offsetting that increased cost of the brand new build, because obviously we don't get the subsidy for those 66 beds, and it's certainly it's a bit of a game changer on that part. So I think we've got to do a business plan or a bit of an idea of what we're doing with the current Grey Gables in the sense of assisted living, and what's it going to cost to renovate that? What's the business model on that? What's the revenue stream on that? Because if that's going to help offset the cost of our debenturing, that's a big component of this and that. So and again, as I iterated before, Simcoe County has a proven track record that does work, and it keeps our long-term costs down as we have had that communication from them over different times. So are we developing that business model or the modeling? Yeah, I guess it's the business modeling of what that looks like moving forward, because I think we have to do that as well.
Thank you, Paul. Kim, go ahead.
So we looked at some modeling for the Rockwood Terrace, for the future phases of Rockwood Terrace. And so the committee has seen some of the numbers, and whether what it takes to be competitive in that assisted living, retirement living space. So I think we heard a little bit about the fact that at the present time, what our seniors population feels comfortable with as far as rents it is maybe not as significant as it is in other markets. I think this could even go back as far as the CBRE report that told us that compared to more urban places, there's less comfort in people paying fairly significant rents for assisted living. Randy's on the call here. I know that we're waiting for SHS to provide us some guidance with regard to what they felt was the highest and best use of Grey Gables. But I will say that the instructions that were provided to SHS when they were asked to go was to talk to the community, talk to the stakeholders, and really take a very broad-based look at what the community needed and what would be in everybody's best interests, rather than a pure financial analysis of what can be done here to be able to achieve the absolute highest amount of revenue. Is that fair, Randy?
Yeah, I think based on the phase 1 report that was presented to this task force or redevelopment committee back in, was that June? Losing track of months. There was
too far, yeah.
2 options that they're focusing on based on the consultation, based on what they heard from that community and stakeholder consultation. One was focusing on assisted living and independent living, and the second was focusing on respite care and short-term needs. So that's what the SHS consulting is working on as we speak. We should have their phase 2 results back this month. And we're hoping to present that back to this redevelopment committee it'll likely be in early September when we have some of that information for what could be possible as part of an overall kind of campus of care type model for that Grey Gables site.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair. I think that's so important that we have that information for us all before we really look at everything. I think we got to look at everything. Right?
No, I agree with what you're saying. Councillor O'Leary, did I see your hand up or not? No, I did not. Mr. Warden? You're muted.
No sound.
No sound? Can you use sign language? And
He's going to have to go out and come back in, I believe.
okay, I'll go to Mr. Mackey. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and Kim and Randy, thank you for your comments. I just, like to follow up on what Councillor McQueen was mentioning in regards to, the opportunity for revenue generation, through assisted living. And I appreciate that further work is being done in that regard. From a lived experience just in the past, few months with my own parents and looking for some assisted living, I can tell the committee that there is not any beds available. I was not able to locate any, and the wait lists were extremely long. I think we did have a report, now this is going back a while, that supported some assisted living or additional assisted living in the Markdale area. So I do believe that there's an opportunity for some revenue generation. I have no idea what that would look like, but I do believe it's part of this equation. And, we need to make sure that we recognize that, we're only talking about cost right now. And certainly, as was supported in the Simcoe County, there is a way to reduce the levy requirement by providing additional services. So I just don't want to lose sight of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Mr. Warden, the floor is yours. You're still muted. I think he's going to go leave and come back again.
He may use a different device the next time.
Okay. So I open the floor up to other questions or concerns from the committee. Councillor Millen, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In regards to the discussion around assisted living revenue offsetting costs for long-term care, those are operational costs, are they not? It has nothing to do with construction. You still have to put the bricks and mortar there, regardless of what you're going to do with it. And then any revenue streams would offset the operations, not the construction, as I understand it, unless I'm way off. The other point I wanted to make was, and looking at the broader picture right across the county, I guess the council is going to have to do a little bit of soul searching, and this committee may as well, of what our priorities are. Is long-term care at the top of the list or very close to the top of the list? And if it is, then we're going to have to find savings somewhere else. And maybe some other big project that is on the horizon is going to have to drop off the page. So it will allow us to do this project. I don't know what that project would be that would drop off the list, but I'm thinking it's going to have to be, a hard decision made. Because I do think this project is important for our communities. It's been demonstrated in the past. And I guess it's to us to decide what is going to drop off at some point. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, for your comments. One thing, as I go through life, I always wanted a Rolls Royce. I could only afford a Jeep. And my question is that we have to think about what can we afford at this present time, what can't we to move our county forward. Just a comment. Mr. Warden, are you able to speak? I'm not sure where he's at.
He's showing as muted.
Okay, am I?
There you go.
In now?
There we go.
Yay.
Yeah. Let there be light.
I apologize. I've been having some problems, I think, with my laptop. I'm going to have it looked at. I'm now on my iPad. I missed what was last said, but nevertheless, a few things. One, I think that the landscape has changed, and I feel like we are trying to shoot at a moving target. And that's not, abnormal, by the way, that's to be expected, I suppose, but it's very, very difficult to know exactly what to do when you've got things constantly in flux. We have a new funding model that we have to deal with. We've got the cost, so your building costs are different. Just things are different. And if we had the crystal ball, we're trying to guess what is the correct interest rate, and all we can do is use the best information that we have right now, which I'm hearing from staff. But, is it going to be that or worse or better? We just don't know. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and all we can do is plan the best that we can in this, what I would call changing landscape. Nevertheless, I got to tell you, these numbers are very sobering. I'm very concerned about these numbers because I'm concerned about the impact on the bigger picture. And I know that as a full council, we'll be talking about the big picture and our priorities. And we've had some discussion already about our repayment limit and our debt repayment capacity. And that will really affect our ability to do things. And this is just one of the things that we do. So if this ties up essentially all of our capacity to borrow, then that should be of concern to all of us wearing our county hats, because it will really limit our options in terms of being able to leverage funds to do some other things that we may want to do. The report is before us, and it's very good, by the way. I'm so glad to have this, because I'd rather know than not know. So, I've been calling for this type of information for a little while. And here it is, boom, okay, you want it, you got it. Well, it's in our face, and we're having to deal with it. The report is just with us for information, Mr. Chairman. So there's no sort of recommendation, but I can't help but think that maybe we ought to be thinking about what is the recommendation of this task force committee to council. Because when we have that bigger discussion, I think that the entire council table might benefit from knowing what are the thoughts of this body with respect to our impact on the bigger picture. So, I think we need to think about, do we want to bring some sort of a recommendation, or at least share with the committee, with the full council, our thoughts. And I'm hearing from our deputy warden that perhaps one of the things that we need to really look at is maybe take some pause around decisions around Grey Gables. I don't know that that's the recommendation we want to make, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but that's what I think I hear him saying, is that we don't have all of the information that we might want to have with respect to Grey Gables. And again, I think Grey Gables is very different than Rockwood. Rockwood, I think it's full steam ahead. Grey Gables is not something that we have to do because we have a Class A facility. We know that we want to do something there, but I'm hearing that, we may want to massage the information a little bit. So maybe one of the recommendations is that we take some time for pause around decisions around Grey Gables and look for that additional information that everyone seems to be feeling they want to have. Looking at my list here, the other concerns, Mr. Chairman, and I know that the staff have talked about this, is operational costs. So, I know that we are a committee concerned about the rebuilding, and so that's about the capital cost, but obviously at the end of it all, we are going to have to deal with, I think, increasing operational costs. And there's that staffing piece that keeps coming back at us. No real plan about how we're going to address the staffing concern. It's here now, and it'll be with us in an even bigger way once this project is all complete. That's it from me for now.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Before I go to Brian, Kim, I would like to put you on the spot, if I could, for a minute, please. Does this have any impact on Andrew and his trying to get his consultant in place if Gray Gables was put on pause? Does that impact that scenario too? Instead of a consultant looking after two, is only looking after one?
Right. And so certainly Colliers is well aware of the fact that we are having these discussions. They bid 2 streams there. So it's not like we're the fees that we have committed to for Colliers would be adjusted if we didn't continue with both projects, if that's what you're asking. If you're asking more about timelines, you certainly heard from Andrew this morning that, in order to meet that 2025 deadline, which is the one that the province has imposed from a licensing perspective on Rockwood Terrace, if we want to keep that going, I'd want to have a conversation with him about our ability to kind of finesse that RFP going out for the architect, that we're solid on this project and we want you to tell us about what it would take to do an add-on or something like that. Like, I think we would have to look at it like that, so that we were clear that we wanted a firm bid and a firm timeline on one, and then look at the other as a potential future thing, but have a solid understanding of the costs and timelines that would come into an additional project if we wanted to handle it like that.
No, I can appreciate that, Kim. Thanks for that. But if I was an architect firm bidding on this particular projects, whether I'm bidding on 2 or 1, even if they are separate, it would impact my ability to move forward with other projects. So
exactly, yeah,
it's just something I want to think about. Councillor Leary, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just going back to Councillor Milne's comment about the losing the big projects down the road because of this decision. I just want to add to that, like, we have to take off projects for the next 25 years with this decision, but I'm not sure why everyone has their surprise face on. But we made this decision a long time ago. We had the cart before the horse. No one had a care in the world about cost, and we're too far in now. So I'm not interested in hearing anyone saying we should pause. This is a council decision that we're going to go ahead and do this. So we need to go ahead and do it. But what I don't understand is if, and maybe this is for Kim or Mary Lou, if we're going to put 1% of the levy towards this project or projects right away, if the total increase to the levy is going to be 4% in the long run, why not make that 2% right off the hop in our next budget that goes towards these projects, and just face up with our taxpayers? This is the decision we made. This is what it's going to cost, and let the political chips fall where they may. But I mean, there's no use dragging your feet now. Like, this is ridiculous money, but I think we've already made that commitment, so we're all in. But I think we need to let the taxpayers know, and let them know by a levy increase right off the hop. There's no use increasing it by 3% later on. Increase it in the next budget by 2%, along with the affordable housing 1%. And this is the way we're going forward. Those are my comments.
Thanks, Frank. Paul, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and really good discussion. A few things. I think Randy mentioned that you're going to have comments back shortly for Gray Gables in the sense of what could be some options there. I think it's interesting that I know in my mind, and when we made this decision as a county council to expand Gray Gables, there was a lot of discussion around that wing, creating that new section of 62 beds at a cost. It's what's pushed this out is because we have to rebuild brand new the 66 beds that we currently have that are in a 20-year-old building. So I think this is something it's unfortunate that that's But maybe we go back to the province and say, look, we have an option A, but we have an option B. And option B is to build the wing, not build a brand new building from the perspective of cost. And so I think that's something that, like maybe it goes back to your part, Mr. Chair, about the Rolls Royce and the Jeep. Maybe the Jeep is the wing. Maybe the Rolls Royce is a brand new building. I'm just saying that. I understand from efficiency, and I understand from all that part, it makes sense to do two new buildings. The cost, the element of scale and the sense of getting somebody to build two is there. There's a lot of things that make sense by doing that. But I still go back to that, looking at that information that's going to come back shortly. What Randy's saying is, what are the options of the current Grey Gables in the future? And I know Councilor Million said about operating costs, but if there's an operating revenue that is generated and that like you just look at rental costs, is just the rental costs for homes and apartments now has, everything's is got to be pushing up all across the board in the sense of rental period. And so the business model has got to show some significant revenue as assisted living. As Councillor Mackey said, you can't find anything. And my last comment I will say is the other side of this equation is we don't hear it much more recently because of all the other aspects of what's going on in our economy and what's going on with post-COVID. But there is that aging baby boomers that cohort is moving into that age group, and the demand for that. And even to add to that, with Grey Gables, if we're putting 20 of those rooms as behavioral rooms, that's changing the dynamics as well, in the sense of that being allocated, and we're getting extra funding for that 20 beds of the 128 moving forward. So there's a little bit of, I think, modeling there as well. So I think it's good information to take to the council. My suggestion is we receive this and take it to the county council for discussion. I think there's too many variables here to sort of make a recommendation, because of, I think it'd be fair to kind of councils as we receive it for information for county council to make that decision. And then the full 18 representatives have that opportunity to, and maybe it's a special meeting. Maybe it's a separate full discussion. We're at that crossroads that if, of this decision and the points that have to be made. But I think it's fair that we need all that information available, all the options available. So not only for ourselves and for the viewing public, that we are making a very educated guess moving forward. And so those are my comments. I just think there's some options here, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Paul. We're having a great discussion here this morning. I'll go to Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to follow up on what Councillor O'Leary, mentioned, and I certainly support, what he was saying. We have made this decision, and yes, we're looking at scary numbers today, but if you look at it, 4% for the average, if the average house is assessed at $500,000, 4%, if whether we do it 1% a year for the next 4 years, or whether we do it at 2% over the next 2 years, for my household, that's $80 on my tax bill. And I was told very clearly, during the last election, how important long-term care was for the people of Grey County. And I can tell you, I am quite comfortable that people think that their tax dollars are well spent for quality long-term care. So I have no issue, taking this back to the people. But I strongly believe that, the people have spoken during the last election, and they told us they want quality Grey County long-term care. Thanks.
Thank you, Scott. We've had a great discussion on this report for information only. I really would feel more comfortable not taking recommendation from this committee back to council. I'd like to see the report go to council and have a great discussion as county council as a whole on this report. Saying that, Christine?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, that is my position as well. We do have the staff report before us. The staff recommendation is to receive his information. And boy, my goodness, did we receive information today in terms of the financial detail and also consideration for our path forward. We know that long-term care is a priority in our Grey County community. We can turn the pages of our strategic plan and also the most recent report that we had in terms of where we're going for strategic priorities in this particular year. Long-term care certainly cries out loud and clear. So this report, I think, is very consistent. We knew the numbers were going to be high, and it's a report that needs to be taken to County Council for consideration. We've got the clear numbers for Rockwood Terrace, the numbers in the particular column for whether we consider a 3% or a 4%, they're there. And the consideration, if there's more information needed for Grey Gables, that is just fine. But we certainly don't want to get to a juncture. And I really want our committee members to hear me on this. If there is a juncture where more information is needed on the one project and we've got the information we need on the other one, let's move ahead. But certainly long-term care is essential for our Grey County community. And I am very prepared at the appropriate time to support the motion that's on the floor. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. Kim, go ahead.
Can I ask the committee then, would you be supportive of me having a conversation with the province to understand what our ability is to make a change to the proposal that we put forward, just so we understand what the process is? Do you want me to ask that question? Like, if we decide that we wanted to do an addition or something else, do we need to resubmit a new proposal?
I think it'd be nice to have that answer to that question. It's not hurting anything to ask the question, is it?
I don't think so, but I want to know that. I just would like to know what the committee's feeling as about that, if it's that question or no question or a different question.
Okay, Scott?
Mr. Chair, thanks, Kim, for asking the question, but, I think we've had that discussion, operationally, as Kim had mentioned, a new build, of 128 beds is far more superior than, adding on for the operational efficiencies. And that would take away from our ability to start a campus of care that, I think a number of us see the merits in being able to provide alternate levels of care on one site. So doing that at Grey Gables, that would take away from our ability to repurpose the current building. So I don't think that discussion needs to take place. Those are my comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Scott. Brian, go ahead.
I think with this idea, I'd maybe go against Scott on this. I think Kim's just being proactive. I mean, if we go back to council now and council asks for the same information, Kim's going to be sitting there thinking I could have had this done 2 weeks ago. So it doesn't hurt to go and ask and have the conversation. I think it's just being proactive, but that's my comment.
I agree with what you're saying, Brian. Christine, go ahead.
Yeah, I would, pardon me. Yes, I would agree. We're having a suggestion from our CIO in terms of going back to the province and having that discussion. I think having all the information is prudent. So I would support the CIO and related staff to move ahead with that. And I appreciate the forward thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Madam Clerk, may I ask a show of hands who would be in favor of, no, I can't, okay.
No, what we can do is, that would be a motion, but what we can do is if the committee is supportive of that, then staff can take direction based on the discussion with the committee today.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Clerk. I certainly don't want to get into trouble. Paul, go ahead.
Thank you. And I keep going on mute because I got some work happening outside my home here today. So I'm trying to keep it quiet. This could be something that we could use as leverage the CEO could use this as a bit of leverage, because if the province, and I know an announcement came out, they talked about the campus of care and that, but maybe a conversation needs to be had with the province. Say, look, you're suggesting this is the way you want to go, but here's some big numbers. Are there other conditional grants or something as a transitional part that could be or possibly applied for? If this is where the province would like to see us go, can we use this as a leverage in your conversation, Kim, in the sense of, there's a bit of a tough road to hoe here. Is there other options of funding if we go with a new bill, or are there some fundings to repurpose an existing long-term care into assisted living? Is there some funding help there? So you just have that conversation, and that gives us even more options, because there could be a win-win-win of that, and maybe, Madam CEO, those questions could be asked, and maybe by asking for this option, that gives you a little bit of a leverage to see if there are other funding possibilities.
Thanks, Paul. Mr. Warden, any comments on Kim's quest?
So I support Kim going and asking the question. I don't think it hurts for us to have that information, and it may settle the debate. I mean, because we're still, wrestling with, should it be a new build, or can we building simply a new wing? If we have that information, then we know that moving forward, it's definitely a full 128 bed new build, and we drop that discussion, and we're moving forward with a full new build. It'd just be nice to have the information for sure. Does it require a new application? Okay, we're moving ahead with the new build.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I guess I'm sort of getting what I wanted indirectly. If I ask Mr. Milne, any comments on Kim's request?
I don't think it hurts to ask, although I would qualify that by saying, and I agree with Mr. O'Leary, that given the emphasis on infection control and efficiencies of staff and all the rest of it, coming out of COVID and so on, I would be surprised if the province said, sure, tack a wing onto the old building. I know it's not an old building, Mr. McQueen, it's only 20 years old, and it has a beautiful roof on it. But that said, all the efficiencies are gained by a new build, and I suspect that's where the province will want to go. But it doesn't hurt to have the question asked.
Thank you, Mr. Milne. Madam CEO, I believe the majority of the committee were receptive to your question and to go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll act on that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've done that without getting in trouble with the clerk, so we're good. Go ahead, Mr. Milne.
Thank you. Just a quick question, or a quick point rather. If we go ahead with the two new builds, and it ties up a lot of our borrowing capacity, or payment capacity rather, the notion of a campus of care, particularly at Rockwood, would come to an abrupt halt. And you wouldn't see any assisted living or anything of that nature for 20 plus years in Durham without another dramatic increase to the levy. And, I agree with Mr. O'Leary, again, as shocking as that might seem. I agree that, we've made this decision. Here, taxpayer is the result of that decision. And I'm sure they'll let us know in short order whether they think we've done the right thing or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Milne. We've had a great discussion on this report here today. I have a mover and a seconder on the report to accept it for information. So I'm going to ask for a show of hands, all in favor of the motion. The motion is carried. So we should move on along with our agenda. We're down to other business. Do we have any other business here today? Seeing none, our next meeting will be determined at a future date. If we've no other business here today, I'll ask for adjournment of this meeting. Moved by Brian, second by Scott, that we adjourn. Show of hands, all in favor. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. For a great meeting.
Have a good day, everyone.
Everyone, take care.
I have